The transgender movement is a confusing topic to explain simply, as definitions for words have been changing and gender ideology has become more subjectively personal over the years. Meaning that pointing out the dangers that transgender ideology poses to women and their rights is also challenging unless the fundamentals of the movement are deconstructed and criticised. However, while referring to numerous sources throughout, this video essay aims to do so by exposing the manipulative and predatory nature of transgender ideology, and how this movement and its fundamentals are harmful to everyone, trans and non-trans alike. 1. Trans means that a person's feelings can determine reality. Woman. A human female refers to someone born with XX chromosomes, who typically has the capacity to bear young or produce eggs. Anyone who doesn't fit that definition is either a male or has a disorder of sex development that could be Turner syndrome, for example. This is caused by the absence or partial absence of an X chromosome, which can lead females to endure infertility, pregnancy complications, skeletal problems, heart problems, among many other symptoms. Other kinds of genetic disorders for females include, but are not limited to, having ovotestes and MRKH syndrome. Much like how being born with fewer fingers doesn't make someone less human, being born with genetic disorders doesn't make females less of a female. Furthermore, a human male refers to someone born with XY chromosomes, who typically produces sperm. Anyone who doesn't fit that definition is either female or has other disorders of sex development, including Klinefelter syndrome, which is a chromosomal condition where a male is born with an extra X chromosome, resulting in the development of smaller testes that produce less testosterone and other symptoms. Other kinds of genetic disorders for males include, but are not limited to, having androgen insensitivity syndrome and a micropenis. Since there are many other disorders of sex development that relate to both females and males, a term was created to simplify everyone's unique cases by placing them all under the umbrella label of intersex. Considering the intersex label is irrelevant for anyone who requires a personal diagnosis, this term exists to remove a layer of complexity regarding disorders of sex development, all by simplifying the numerous sex-based genetic conditions into a misinformed label that implies that one can be born with both sexes, neither of them, or somewhere in between. In short, everyone diagnosed with a disorder of sex development and labelled synonymously as intersex is fundamentally male or female. Furthermore, those who cite patients with disorders of sex development as evidence for gender ideology imply that only intersex people can be transgender, and that everyone else is either faking it or drawing false conclusions about their identity. Considering there's no biological evidence supporting the objectivity of gender ideology that would be accepted by trans activists who aren't intersex, it follows that trans activists are compelled to redefine words to add fallacious validity to their belief-based movement, leading people to treat the question, "What is a woman?" in a more delicate manner than necessary. Cambridge Dictionary defines woman as an adult female human. Considering the previous definitions, using the term female when explaining women excludes all men from identifying as such. Regardless, a trans activist mother used her trans-identifying child to force Queensland into letting both adults and adolescents change the assigned sex on their birth certificates, so official documents can match their subjective gender identity, implying that trans activists are trying to change the definition of the term woman to being an adult who lives and identifies as female, though they may have been considered to have a different sex at birth. Beyond contradicting the definition of a previously synonymous term being female, this new definition suggests that socially constructed, culture-based gender stereotypes can determine an individual's sex regardless of their biological nature. The same stereotypes that force people to act and dress based on their biological sex, or to be shamed and harassed for not doing so. The stereotypes that seem to define a woman appear to be that girls are docile and people-pleasing, quiet, patient, fragile, and persistent, sulkers who are school-smart perfectionists, interested in fashion, arts, and parenting, and sentimental, submissive, and superstitious. However, because admitting these gendered stereotypes risk exposing a sexist fundamental, trans activists will argue that the definition is too complicated, and that gender is a personal matter to avoid the reality of what they're promoting. The reality being that any females who feel uncomfortable expressing themselves according to their community's stereotypical standards risk employing strategies of deception to cope with their lack of self-confidence and diminished societal acceptance. Thus, they become the self-fulfilling prophecy their community expected them to be. So when men and boys aren't stereotypically being less dramatic rule breakers, strong, dominant, independent, and adventurous, energetic gamers who never cry, car and building enthusiasts, who are direct, violent, and disorderly, they, along with their female peers, may feel burdened by their biological sex from young ages, as school teaches children the gender concept as an objective fact rather than revealing its culturally subjective nature, done by introducing gender as a spectrum, which can't be considered as one due to the ambiguous nature of what it means to be socially male and female, lack of even distribution of stereotypes between being male and female, lack of even distribution regarding the gender identities of all of humanity, false implications that there could exist a most and a least for both a masculine man and a feminine woman, fallacious evidence concluding that a man can be more of a woman than a biological female and vice versa, invalid comparison between men and women, which makes about as much sense as creating a spectrum for the stereotypes linked with the range of skin colours, and the dependence on fallacious, culture-based evidence that isn't grounded in any objective reality. Furthermore, if something like gender can be infinitively defined based on every human's interpretation of their sex-based stereotypical culture, then the definition becomes too broad and both meaningless and non-existent, all while ironically disregarding the possibility of gender being defined as being yourself, despite how you were born, and having the strength to look in a mirror and love yourself the way you are. Privacy. On the surface, this fundamental could motivate people to have a better outlook on life, since if one feels like they're gonna have a great day, that day is more likely to turn out great. But trans activists have redefined the term feelings to one that relates more to a religious person's feelings that God may exist. These feelings are less emotion-based and more desire-focused, as they reveal the true reasons behind an individual's actions, especially when people use their feelings to identify as the opposite sex interchangeably. Considering women are more likely to experience sexual harassment, especially at younger ages, from male partners, friends, and strangers when compared to men, it seems understandable that females might feel a little intimidated by a man at first. Men also face difficulties, but since women are generally not as tall or strong as males, safe spaces are necessary for them as, despite being told there are more good men than bad men, anxieties don't simply disappear, especially if the females in mind are victims. Transgender activists tend to disregard the anxieties of women when they claim that a convincing stereotypical expression or declaration of the opposite sex entitles men access to those safe spaces, even if that ironically prioritizes the men who feel comfortable enough to enter female bathrooms and locker rooms over the women and girls who feel too afraid to admit they're scared of trans women. Exemplified by a nurse at Darlington Memorial Hospital, Carly Hoy, who, upon entering a female-only change room, would see trans woman Rose Henderson, a sexually active male, standing inside prolongedly, waiting for her to get changed on multiple occasions. Since transgender ideology is a feelings-based belief system, the main issue with the movement is that there is no regulation specifying how convincing a person must be of the opposite gender to gain access to sex-specific places. So, without a clear definition of what a woman is, gender boils down to an individual's opinion, and questioning that can be viewed by trans people as bigoted and hateful. However, there is a solution for those who express themselves convincingly as the opposite sex, and would rather not use the disabled bathroom for whatever reason. The solution is an anonymous reporting system, so that anyone who's frightening women and children due to their masculine presence within female-only spaces can be identified and banned, leaving those who pass free of their gender identity anxieties, in theory. However, the issue with that solution is that trans women have been known to become threatening and violent upon having their gender identities questioned by those who only want to experience respect, privacy, and trust in the organisations they partake in. These threatening trans women include, but aren't limited to, trans woman Christine Wood, who sued a gym and caused their staff to undergo anti-discrimination training, all because Wood couldn't use the female change rooms and locker rooms after claiming to have transitioned to a woman. Trans woman Laura Holstein is suing a women's-only gym and has filed a discrimination lawsuit against Doris Lang, the gym's owner, after being denied a membership for being a man. Trans woman Roxanne Tickle, who was removed from a women's-only app called Giggle, is suing its creator, Sal Grover, in a series of high court trials that are determining officially whether a transgender person can be protected from feelings-based identity discrimination or not. Christine, Holstein, and Tickle could have simply gone elsewhere after being denied access to those places. Instead, they fought to sabotage and shut down any organisations that opposed their personal views by wasting the time, money, and energy of owners who are simply trying to protect their public appearance and reputation. Trans women like them do this because they may truly believe they're proper women, who are recognised as such by everyone who affirms their gender identity as reality, and by those who help them win legal battles over their gender identities. However, they're also coping with the anxiety that this affirmation is dishonestly coming from everyone who's either at risk of being threatened by them or secretly disagrees with their identity and hates them for it. In a society that affirms transgenderism, these anxieties only get revealed when an honest person, even mistakenly, labels a trans person with the pronouns of their biological sex, revealing an existential dilemma that they struggle to cope with. As while rage baiters can be dismissed for simply being annoying, honest slip-ups reveal the possibility that everyone the trans person knows may be lying about their gender-affirming statements and that they're not convincing as the opposite sex at all. Meaning that all their friends, family, professionals, and peers might be both deceiving them and fearful of how they'll respond to honesty. That dread can understandably become overwhelmingly painful. So instead of accepting that reality, trans people are likely to assume that the honest person purposely labelled them incorrectly, out of hateful intent. This gets demonstrated by trans woman Lily Contino, who'd harass restaurant managers by encouraging them to discipline their staff for the mistakes of misgendering him, while stating that being referred to by the pronouns of his biological sex hurt like a knife in the heart. Considering Blair White, who ironically identifies as his biological male sex, could likely pass as a woman, he exposes the men who care very little about whether they're convincing as a stereotypical woman or not. Granted, these people may genuinely feel like the opposite sex, but they could also be mistaken about their feelings-based conclusions, meaning that society is being forced to submit to the delusions of trans women even if it risks ruining the reputations of transsexual crossdressers. Trans woman Kaylee exemplifies this, as they felt threatened using the men's bathroom and preferred to use the female one instead. This implies he does not see women as threatening, and hypocritically cannot understand why they might feel uncomfortable with a bearded male-presenting person, such as himself, using their bathroom. Then a brave mother told Kaylee that he didn't belong in the female bathroom, and that he was frightening other women while inside. Kaylee responded by yelling at the mother while her 2 children stood nearby, watching him attempt to scare the family into submission to his feelings-based worldview. These are just some of the publicly available cases showcasing how men have exploited gender ideological beliefs, but many others likely go unreported due to the risks involved in doing so. This is exemplified by an anonymous source who revealed the truth behind the temporary suspension of Dandenong Oasis's ladies and men's only night events at their swimming pool, as well as explaining what the program review is. The truth being that ladies only swim sessions are open to all women, regardless of gender identity, and men took advantage of that. The anonymous source explained that the ladies-only swim night helped Muslim women in particular learn how to swim without their religious attire, as they must only wear that when men are around. However, when men joined the event while claiming to be women, Muslim women felt the need to cover up again, and other females complained that trans women were making them feel unsafe. Instead of banning men from joining the women-only events, Dandenong Oasis temporarily suspended the events, meaning that not only Muslim women have lost another opportunity to learn how to swim, but women in general have lost another safe place away from men. Over time, most members of trans communities have claimed that they're being disrespected when banned from sex-based spaces, and that women in particular should learn to be more progressive and simply relinquish their safe spaces to any man claiming to be female. They advocate this while ignoring that removing female-only spaces from the public disrespects the boundaries set by women, who are likely feeling a constant haunting from the rates of sexual violence committed against them. Exemplified by Natalie Barnett, who opened a gym called The Girl Spot, with an early concept that allowed trans women to attend. However, after learning all the harassment, sexual assault, and violence that females face in gyms, Natalie banned trans women from attending so that biological women had a place where they could feel safe. While trans people felt rightfully cheated out of a gym due to their sudden exclusion, some activists have tried to ruin Natalie's reputation by claiming that banning trans women is comparable to black women facing the same fate, as both have supposedly been denied full recognition as women throughout history. However, this is a false comparison, created by someone who thinks that any black woman who supports the gym is fostering white supremacist ideals. These trans people expect the same respect they aren't willing to give to women and children when they are at their most vulnerable. When society accepts gender fluidity and gender transitions in good faith, trusting that trans people are genuine about their claims, that trust can be used to lie and help abusers gain access to spaces that can cause irreparable physical, mental, and social harm to girls and women whose anxieties get disregarded to prioritize protecting predatory trans individuals. Exemplified by a former Rikers Island Rose M. Singer women's jail prisoner, who, upon entering the female-only prison as an inmate, introduced himself to his inmates as a straight male, who successfully lied about being transgender to prey on women even while behind bars. Additionally, despite informing correctional staff that this male sexually propositioned an inmate one day, then groped her in the bathroom a couple of days later, officers failed to remove the perpetrator from the jail, giving the male predator the freedom to sexually assault the same victim the next day while she was sleeping. Since the honesty of trans identities cannot and sometimes will not be regulated, transgender people either belong to their biological sex-based places or their own umbrella space altogether. If society doesn't oppose those using trans ideologies to oppress women by removing their public safe spaces, women will be encouraged to stay at home and follow strict religious laws and live similarly to Middle Eastern women to feel safe from men. 2. Trans means to support women's rights. Feminism. Throughout history, across the world, women have been second-class citizens who have been gaslit since birth into believing they're equal to the men who inflicted this oppression onto them. I can't believe I'm about to say this, but religious scripture supports this view as it consistently values men higher than women, exemplified by the biblical and Islamic females who have been viewed as property to be stolen, bought and replaced, especially at young ages, and shamed and ostracized for uncontrollable biological acts, plus many, many other atrocities. The Bible states in Deuteronomy 2-282 that 2 men are required to provide a trustworthy witness. If 2 men cannot be found, then 1 man and 2 women of your choice will witness. So if one of the women forgets, the other may remind her. Shout out to Testify, who helped me find this information, ironically in the same video where he praises Jesus for how Christianity treats their women. Side note, if the New International Version is the wrong Bible to reference, please let me know which one is correct and why. Because there's a lot to choose from, and it seems humans know how to write God's stories better than his almighty self, because we've retranslated and revised it a lot. Anyways, Islam's holy book, the Quran, supports this by stating in Surah Al-Baqarah 21:10-14 that God, written by men, permits other men to abduct foreign women from cities they pillaged, shave their heads, and only let them mourn the loss of loved ones for a month. Afterwards, these abducted women, who were quickly forced into being their wives, would be abandoned in the streets if they couldn't please their abuser, husband. 22:28-29. That if a man rapes a single virgin girl and is discovered, he must pay her father 50 shekels to marry her, trapping her in a relationship with her rapist for life. Shout out to Mindshift for helping me find these verses. Quoting the Quran and the Bible feels relevant, since, despite their insistence on baseless supernatural claims, these books provide insight into the laws that forced women to be trapped in abusive, oppressive, and degrading households, reflecting how they were treated more like property than even second-class humans. Also, for those who don't know, I switched what passages were told in the Bible and Quran, in case followers of those faiths thought the opposing passages were abhorrent. While it did take thousands of years for women to break free of the man-made oppression that kept them quiet, traumatized, scared, submissive, obedient, and uneducated from birth, eventually the feminist movement began and acted to change those views worldwide. Feminism exists to challenge religious, misogynistic, and sexist beliefs about what a woman is, and her role in society, done by demanding that females be given more opportunities to prove themselves as capable and deserving of rights equal to men, and by offering more support for victims. Starting with showing that purity culture is a nonsense concept, designed to shame women for their sexual desires and trap them in unhealthy abusive relationships, among other awful things. To achieve this, feminism fights for the right of women to vote, divorce, take out loans, and own property, for women's sexual and reproductive rights, to prevent sexual violence, female genital mutilation, plus forced marriage, pregnancy, sterilization, and abortions, for women's freedom of movement, specifically so they can legally drive and own passports in Saudi Arabia, and for the acceptance of women in any sports and workplaces. Among many other things, feminism has had enough to fight for as it stood, but that didn't stop transgender activists from shoehorning their ideology into the movement, so that feminists could fight for trans rights as well. Twisted, because the transgender movement found a loophole to trick feminists into fighting for increasing the rights for men to enter anywhere they desired, by simultaneously removing safe spaces for women. Feminist Alicia Henley used to be a trans advocate who typically resorted to circular explanations to justify transgender ideology. This being, some men feel like a woman, and only women can feel like a woman, so feelings must determine whether or not someone is a woman. Since Alicia felt like a woman, she could only conclude that trans women told the truth, and that calling skeptics of trans ideology transphobic bigots was reasonable. Then she witnessed modern feminists silence women who fought to keep men out of bathrooms and female-only spaces, with ruined reputations and civil punishment. Afterwards, she questioned the motives of transgender activists when they merged with feminism, especially once she realised transgender activists were advocating for children to compromise their fertility with puberty blockers before their prefrontal cortexes had fully developed. Furthermore, trans activists, ironically, have grown resentful of the feminists who are mainly fighting for the rights of biological women, and now call them trans exclusionary radical feminists, or TERFs for short. Because yet again, with no evidence to support their gender claims, trans activists just resort to labelling people with mean-sounding names. Worse still, trans activists have been known to send death threats, assault, intimidate, and stalk women who are merely fighting for equal rights and for men to respect the boundaries of women. As seen from woman Biddy O'Loughlin, a comedian whose stand-up shows got cancelled at 2 different pubs and gets constant hate from strangers due to her views about gender identity being that men can't be women. Woman Julie Bindel, who was banned from hosting a women's empowerment event at the Aspley Library by the City Council for her views on transgender rights, being that men can't be women. Woman Helen Joyce, who was verbally abused and lunged at by a transgender activist for her gender-critical views, while discussing the future of women's sex-based rights. Unlike transgender ideology, feminism has spent centuries challenging gender stereotypes by demonstrating that sex is an irrelevant factor when choosing clothes, jobs, hobbies, and lifestyles, as anyone can do anything. But transgender ideology claims the opposite, asserting that any woman who behaves stereotypically masculine, or vice versa, must be dealing with a gender identity crisis when their expression doesn't match their birth sex. However, although gender stereotypes are shaped by the community one belongs to, transgender activists tend to confirm the anxieties of mentally ill individuals. They do this by agreeing with these largely sexist views and falsely linking a person's biology to their expression of identity. Ironically, feminism originally aimed to challenge the gender stereotypes that exaggerated the differences between men and women, but now is criticized and shamed for asserting that some biological sex differences are real and not merely based on feelings. Women's sports. Women seem to be in a never-ending fight for the basic human rights that most men are born with across the globe, and throughout history. Regarding the topic at hand, sports have been a male-dominated form of entertainment that women have been fighting to partake in for centuries. Through challenging sexism, gender-based disparities, and inequalities within sports, women have been fighting for participation rights to remove the misconception that women aren't fit enough to partake in sports, and equal pay and maternity benefits to motivate more women to partake in sports. Women have also been fighting against religious beliefs using gender roles to shame women for showing too much skin, mandated uniforms that are often rooted in sexism and sexualizing women, which limits their participation in sports, and gender testing to ensure that only women are participating in female-only sports events, which can get complicated when women with disorders of sex development want to compete as well. For this video essay, I'm not criticizing people such as Caster Semenya and Dutty Chand, as they were both born female but have higher levels of testosterone than most other women. Due to their disorders of sex development, women like them have been forced to choose between abandoning competitive sports or suppressing their naturally occurring hormones with medical intervention so they can participate more fairly, even if these treatments carry the risk of negative long-term side effects. And after fighting, all women can participate in female-only sports freely, without any medical treatments that could harm intersex women. The transgender movement took advantage of this particular win, since if no one can be excluded from women-only sports for having higher testosterone levels than females, that means men can participate, destroy the female competition, and support women's rights all at once, leading many trans women who couldn't win against men to use their general size, age, and strength differences to compete in female sports and steal many prizes, records, and scholarship opportunities from women. Examples of this include trans woman 50-year-old Gabrielle Ludwig playing on a women's junior college basketball team. Trans woman June Eastwood winning Women's Cross Country Athlete of the Week after competing in a women's cross country team, even after finishing in second place. And trans woman Sasha Lowerson, who took first place in both the Open Women's and Open Women's Logger competitions at the West Coast Suspensions Longboard and Logger State Championships. Here are many other examples if you're interested. Even though women need their own sports category due to the athletic advantages that come with being male, trans activists have created a system that fosters sexism, as shown by the men who feel like women, who are stealing first place prizes and winning state, regional, national, and international titles in female-only sports categories. Examples of this include trans woman Anna Caldas, who won 5 national championships in women's swimming with shocking winning margins. Trans woman Van Leuven, easily winning darts competitions and demotivating females like Data Hedman from competing. Trans woman Catherine Phillips, who won the 2025 USA Cycling National Championship in the Women's Masters 55 to 59-year-old category, leaving female competitors like Julie Peterson unaware until it was obvious. Here are even more examples if you're interested. Furthermore, age differences don't seem to bother the transgender movement, since activists have fought for all women to participate in female-only sports categories. Examples of this include trans woman Melody Wiseheart, a 50-year-old who confused and terrified teenage girls as young as 8 in a shared locker room and was allowed to compete against them in a Canadian swimming event. And trans woman Ricky Trez, a 29-year-old who beat a 13-year-old girl for first place in a skateboarding tournament. Additionally, this acceptance of men invading female-only categories has even extended to winning Women of the Year awards. Examples of this include trans woman Brianna Skinner, who was named the 2025 Sydney Local Woman of the Year. Trans woman Caitlyn Jenner, who won the Glamour Women of the Year 2015 award. Trans woman Alba Reeder, who won the International Women of Courage award. Trans woman Rachel Levine, who won the USA Today's Women of the Year in 2022. Trans woman Dylan Mulvaney, who won Attitude Magazine's first ever Women of the Year award. Trans women and the activists who support them may claim they're empowering women by winning these titles, prizes, and breaking records. However, they overlook the fact that males typically have greater muscle thickness and strength than females, which makes them biologically different from women. This means women have been pushed back to where they began, in a place where they're discouraged from participating in sports because of the dangers that men pose to them. Since anyone who points out these facts risks damaging their reputation and being labelled transphobic and bigoted nowadays, women are unable to do much about this and are forced to accept unfair losses. Exemplified by University of Kentucky swimmer Riley Gaines, who, despite tying for 5th place with trans woman Leah Thomas, was told to stand on the podium with a 6th place award next to the tied male holding the 5th place medal. Her unfair loss was further demonstrated by her male competitor being listed ahead of Gaines on the official results page, and when trans activists like Simone Biles initially called Riley a truly sick, sore loser for complaining about trans women competing in female sports. This may seem silly to ask, but with trans women claiming victimhood after being shamed for joining female-only sports, plus the other issues, what's stopping every women's category of sport from being fully comprised of men? According to stadium profits, men are more entertaining to watch play sports, and they're apparently so talented that even women aren't winning Women of the Year awards as often. It just seems like female-only categories may assimilate into becoming another men's category, just that now women can't even fight to compete fairly in professional sports anymore, since no matter what, they will always have to compete with men. 3. Trans means to spread the truth. Nature. Since socially and culturally bound stereotypes make for weak evidence for the existence of transgender ideology, trans activists have been forced to find other ways to prove their movement's validity. So to defend the right of men to declare themselves as women to enter female-only bathrooms, gyms, prisons, sports, spaces, and more, trans activists may suggest that the ability to swap sexes is a natural part of biology by comparing humans to other animals. They argue that because clown and raisfish can swap their sex, and starfish are simultaneously male and female, perhaps humans can do so as well. Interestingly, all humans and animals start out female as embryos, until sufficient androgens are released to offset maternal estrogens. That allows half of them to become male. But what the transgender movement overlooks is that this occurs naturally due to the biology of the species, the development of life, and various environmental factors. Furthermore, trans activists do the following to make false comparisons between species seem relevant to their gender ideology. They compare the natural sex change biology of some fish to their unnatural hormonal and surgical treatments that castrate, mutilate, and sterilize human patients, with no means of changing their sex chromosomes. Cherry-pick sex-change denominators between species to justify their practices on humans, while disregarding the other horrific things animals do to each other. Forgets to mention that male clownfish only become female if no other females remain, meaning the comparison only works for a human male if all female humans disappear. And disregard the fact that aquatic life is completely different from terrestrial life. To be fair, though, I'm sure the trans activists who use this as evidence are minimal, since the better proof they have is their DSM-5 approved mental disorder called gender dysphoria. Gender dysphoria is diagnosed to anyone who strays away from their society's sex-based stereotypical expectations by dressing and behaving differently from the categories they're placed in from birth. Since these people are simply being themselves, this implies that their societies are experiencing gender dysphoria since they're the ones who are confused about one person's gender not matching their sex. When an individual confuses their society's gender norms, they threaten the objectivity of gender stereotypes by informing others that they could break free as well. If too many people disregard gender-based stereotypes, the foundations of the transgender movement crumble, and trans activists realize this and aim to ensure that that doesn't happen. When a community becomes gender dysphoric over witnessing someone stray from societal norms, trans activists affirm that anyone who does so has a mental disorder and should be fixed to alleviate their distress. Once that individual takes puberty blockers and fully transitions, they'll more closely look how they're acting and remove their society's gender confusion that's instead been placed on the victim. Furthermore, there's already a term that describes a community of people who can't handle the idea of men and women breaking free from culture-based stereotypes that summarizes the gender dysphoria diagnosis perfectly. This term is sexism, because these trans people have experienced it so blatantly that the traumatizing abuse gets celebrated by members of the transgender community. Weak and damaging evidence aside, trans activists are loud minorities who threaten the rights of women and spread sex-based misinformation. Additionally, they're ignoring that any man who enters a female-only space or competition has already shown he doesn't care about or respect women's boundaries, which makes him the most dangerous type of man to be in there. Statistics. Who controls the past controls the future. Who controls the present controls the past, is a party slogan repeated by party leader Big Brother from George Orwell's 1984. It means that since the past can only be proven with memories and documentation, those who write history can interpret the truth as they like, especially if it makes them look altruistic, progressive, and moral, leading a movement with a favourable image to stay in power for longer. As for the second part, memories aren't reliable, they are malleable. Since nobody can experience everything the past has to offer, we depend on news and history classes for the truth, which is typically the truth of the power in charge as well. Meaning, if the movement in charge influences those who hold, report, and teach the evidence, in the eyes of the majority, the past can be whatever the authority desires it to be. As for the minority of people who know the truth, they will, at the very least, be ignored by the authority in charge, as the power is basically won by them. At most, however, the party will see any denial of their truth and altruism as an attack against justice and will fight to silence them with threats of disgrace, infamy, cancellation, harassment, ostracization, abuse, civil punishment, and imprisonment. This is relevant because it seems that activists of the transgender movement are the said authority that uses their influence and power to convince police and news outlets to report false information as truth regarding the sex of individuals who enter sports and commit crimes, exemplified by the following cases. Here's a content warning if you'd understandably rather not know of the atrocities committed by trans women. Please skip to here for the rest of the video. Anthony, a Sheffield man who admitted to possessing over 1,000 indecent images of children ranging between 13 and 5 years of age, was reported as a female named Tony Prince. A male with 90 criminal convictions, including assault, harassment, shoplifting, and pushing a police officer onto a tube line, was not only reported as a woman named Paris Valletta Bregazzi, but was also not referred to as a trans woman at any point in this article. A man intending to murder 3 Sydney strangers inside a 7-Eleven by brutally assaulting them with an axe was reported as an intoxicated woman named Evie Amati, who did so after feeling enraged from feeling shamed from an online date's texts. Martin Ponting, a man, was jailed for raping 2 girls, to which he underwent gender reassignment surgery to identify as Jessica Winfield, Following this, he was transferred to a women's prison where he made inappropriate sexual advances on other female prisoners, with details being hidden. Stephen Wood, a male coward who has convictions for indecent assault, indecent exposure, and gross indecency involving children, animal cruelty, alongside being sentenced for drugging and raping a pregnant woman, raping another woman multiple times, sexually assaulting 2 others, and stabbing his neighbour repeatedly. Transitioned as a woman and was reported as such. This individual, who merely wore female clothing, now named Karen White, was transferred to a women's-only prison with his genitals intact and prior crimes ignored, where he induced his female inmates to a 3-month reign of terror involving multiple rape and sexual offences towards them. Just to name a few. Considering 1 out of 10 trans women get accepted into women's prisons, and as criminals are likely to have been incarcerated for sex-based crimes, it can be argued that the injustice towards women in these jails exceeds knowledge due to the unknown number of men who occupy them, demonstrated by trans woman Ramel Blunt, who raped a female prisoner in the showers of a women's prison, to which the staff of the prison institution attempted to cover up the assault and prevented the victim from seeking medical care after being abused. End of the content warning. Perhaps these examples are just the extremes and can be disregarded as outliers to the community. But if everyone has that mindset, only the potential and current abusers get empowered from that ignorance. Another thing to note is that the articles I've referenced in this video refer to these men as women by using she/her pronouns when describing their actions, showing that no matter how heinous the offence is, respecting a criminal's gender identity seems to remain an importance to journalism. Problematic, because since the mention of trans in someone's identity implies that these criminals are not fully the opposite sex, activists have convinced the justice system to disregard the sex change aspect of abusers. Meaning that since, for example, a criminal trans woman is now officially a criminal female, the crime rate for women has risen instead of the transgender crime rate, leading to false statistics being produced in the name of protecting potential abusers who take advantage of the system. This next part may seem a bit conspiratorial, but this still feels important to talk about, and I'm curious how you feel about the conclusions the research has appeared to lead me. Firstly, statistics from the Office for National Statistics demonstrated that by March 2019, 96%, or 9 out of 10 adults, had experienced sexual abuse committed by males as a child under the age of 16. However, the BBC provided conflicting statistics, as they've reported an 84% increase in the cases of female-perpetrated child sexual abuse in England and Wales, increasing from 1,249 cases to 2,297 between 2015 and 2019. Furthermore, out of 125 transgender inmates, 60 of them were serving time for possessing, distributing, or making indecent images of children, plus other sexual offences including rape, sexual assault, pedophilia, indecent assault, gross indecency, and more. Additionally, 17 other trans inmates refused to reveal the details of their sexual offences, meaning that if numbers are consistent, there are 2 trans women for every 3 women in prison for sexual offences, and that almost 900 of the 2,297 cases could be males who identify as female, which accounts for almost all of the BBC's reported increase in female-perpetrated child sexual abuse in England and Wales between the years 2015 and 2019. My point is, with police and journalists reporting male criminals as females, they're causing general statistics to become unreliable, as it's now hard to say whether the crime rate in women are rising or not. This is important because the men who commit acts of sexual assault don't add much to the male statistics. But even a small number of those same men can make a doubling difference if they're classified as female, creating the impression that sexual crimes have increased for women and bringing the public to false conclusions. Conspiracy aside, this extends beyond recorded crime statistics, as demonstrated by recent recordings of female leaders who are males that, by being trans, are falsely inflating the statistics of women in power. Examples of this include trans woman Rachel Levine was confirmed to work a top government job by the US Senate as an admiral of the US Public Health Service Commissioned Corps in 2021. Trans woman Audrey Tang, who is the digital minister of Taiwan and is in charge of social innovation, open government and youth engagement. Trans woman Andrea Jenkins, who serves Ward 8 on the Minneapolis City Council and was elected to a political office in the United States. Plus many others, who including Rachel, Audrey and Andrea, likely mean well, but are contributing to a dystopian future where sex-based statistics can't be trusted. Furthermore, the statistics of female-based sports are also greatly impacted since it isn't a minority of trans women taking the prizes and accomplishments from biological women. For some reason, it mostly seems like a majority, because the examples just keep revealing themselves. By allowing trans activists and those influenced by them to decide how we remember the criminals, leaders, and athletes of the past, women not only get gaslit into thinking they are accurately being represented in society, but are also losing opportunities to empower themselves and their sense of womanhood. If reporters, researchers, and journalists continue to value a person's feelings over factual reality, trust in statistical conclusions will dwindle, and less will be learnt and understood about our society, which will make it harder for things to improve. Misinformation. Despite this fundamental's claim that the transgender movement desires the truth to create a safe world for everyone to be able to dress and act as freely as they'd like to, reality shows that under a feelings-based ideology, it's not possible to create anything close to a universal utopia for all. This is because, regardless of the system, someone always suffers, and in most cases, the people suffering are women. This logic applies to the transgender movement, since activists have claimed that science has proven that trans women hold no advantages over female athletes in any sports, along with using deceitful tactics to justify arguments with self-victimization, distractions, and unrelated evidence. For example, Gender Justice claims that the trans movement is simply promoting inclusion and diversity by celebrating perseverance and human potential, only to later say that banning trans women from female sports is not only pushing a harmful stereotype that paints women as weak, fragile, and in need of protection, but is also undermining decades of progress in gender equality. They also claim that trans athletes represent a tiny fraction of competitors, and that anyone questioning this is disregarding the real issues of pay inequality, underfunding, racism, and sexual harassment. To which, distracting the readers from the main topic by both villainizing feminists and using red herrings to move the focus onto other unrelated topics, is a telling way to spot a lack of evidence for not only transgender ideology, but all of them. For starters, facts are based on objective reality, and stereotypes are based on both subjective conformity and societally driven authority. Men generally being stronger than women is a fact, and disregarding this by shaming those who say otherwise only places competitive women in unnecessary danger. According to the website Women in Sport, compared to age-matched females at any given body weight, Adult males on average have greater upper and lower limb strength, 20 kilograms more skeletal muscle mass, greater hand grip strength, height advantages, larger hearts with greater blood volume, bigger lungs, and stronger, denser skeletons, giving men a greater advantage against women in all athletics-based sports, even after undergoing gender hormone therapy by suppressing bodily testosterone production. Despite the efforts of gender-affirming treatment, after 12 months, transgender women remained 48% stronger than female athletes due to their retained muscle mass, strength, and larger quadriceps. Another study suggested that after a year of taking estrogen and suppressing their testosterone, while trans women and women would show no difference in the amount of completed push-ups and sit-ups, trans women were still 12% faster runners at all time points when compared to women. Their findings suggested that despite being fair in a couple areas, the fact that they have any advantages over women at all should make them require more than 1 year of testosterone suppression before competing competitively in female-only sports. Supporting my case is transgender woman Mian Bagger, a Danish golfer who, despite being the first trans woman to compete in women's golf, now believes they shouldn't have been allowed. Furthermore, despite being a hypocrite, they've stated that allowing any male-bodied competitors in female competitions is a slap in the face to women due to how trans women can dominate women's sports. My point is that downplaying the unfairness of males competing in female sports by claiming that only a minority of them do so disregards the damage that can come from trans women taking competitive opportunities away from women, exemplified by Terry Wood and Andrea Yearwood, who stole the opportunities, records, and prizes from females 235 times while competing on a Connecticut high school track team from 2017 to 2020. Reinforcing my point is college senior Chelsea Mitchell, a female who ran the 100-meter dash at the Class S championship preliminaries in 12.14 seconds, and was seeded first going into the finals. She was the fastest girl in the state, and had fellow athletes chant her name in support for her upcoming state championship race. But Chelsea was shaken while lined up at the starting blocks, as two biological males identified as female readied on both her sides. Since being 15 years old, Chelsea has competed against both of these males, and despite being the fastest girl, experienced constant heartbreak from never beating the male runners. However, she felt a surge of hope. The gun went off, and Chelsea took off. Adrenaline pumped in her blood, and she thought that maybe, just maybe, she could pull out a win. Chelsea finished the race at 12.02 seconds, crossing the finish line second. One of the male athletes came first at a clocked-in time of 11.93 seconds. Despite being the fastest girl, she had now lost the state championship to a stronger, faster, biological male who stood proudly atop the winner's podium that day. Terry and Andrea were placed on trial for denying hundreds of athletics opportunities to girls, only for the American Civil Liberties Union to rule that females lost nothing from trans women who partook in women's sports, and that Terry and Andrea deserved the 235 opportunities they won. Furthermore, here's a list of the tiny fraction of competitors that the Gender Justice website claimed was unnecessary to look into. In hindsight, I guess that list was tiny. So here's another one. Additionally, these men get away with infiltrating and dominating female-only sports by sending threats of fines and other means of sabotage to organizations that consider declining their requests to join. exemplified by trans woman Christina Ginther, who sued a women's football team for $20,000 after being rejected for being male, then joined a different women's football league successfully, likely because the new team didn't want to be sued as well. After sabotaging the first team and creating an unfair competitive environment for the entire sport, Ginther has since retired as a brave woman, rather than a selfish male. All of these cases show that science on transgenderism does not support legitimacy or promote equality, but instead focuses on finding loopholes, spreading misinformation, and downplaying the impact of men competing against women, all to allow male participation in female sports when men aren't athletic enough to compete against other men. These focuses get exemplified by the following article, Trans Health Research, as it claims that taking gender-affirming hormone treatments is a justifiable loophole to let males compete in female sports, while disregarding the few permanent advantages men have over women in strength. Spreads misinformation by stating multiple times that there's a very low participation rate of trans people in sports to make the issue seem less dire, and contradicts that statement by also saying that a third of trans adults engage in sport, and undermines the dominance that trans women pose over females by referencing 2 examples of them not winning medals in the Olympics, by ignoring the fact that those men took 2 Olympic spots from female athletes. Furthermore, researching the writers' backgrounds for this article exposes a conflict of interest for all 3 of them, which explains the dishonesty of the website Trans Health Research. The writers include Dr. Sav Zivwinkle is a trans non-binary interdisciplinary researcher and educator with the Trans Health Research Group. Ellie Ward Smith is a trans non-binary woman who's an LGBTQIA+ community advocate. And Ada Xiong is a woman who established a trans medical research group in 2017. Their studies and articles need to portray transgender movement kindly, because anything else would be bad for business. Like gender justice, the website National Women's Law Center thinks anyone who claims that trans women have an overall competitive advantage over women is feeding a sexist stereotype that questions the femininity of female athletes by believing that biological women are physically inferior to men. This interpretation of the viewpoint suggests a form of projection from the trans community, as personally, I disagree with that sentiment. Being stronger than others doesn't mean they are necessarily weak. An example being an ant racing against a healthy human adult. Ironically, the weak action is for the strong person to compete against those who can't match their strength. Side note, both websites didn't reveal their writers for some reason, as far as I can tell. If they were spreading real science, wouldn't they reveal their names? It seems the evidence used by trans activists to support their ideology depends on downplaying their movement's risks to women, deflecting abuse with unrelated red herrings, prioritizing men's mental health over women's, fallacies that use their interpretation of gender to prove their beliefs, a dishonest straw-manning of the opposition, false comparisons with fish, and self-entitlement. Like religions that only focus on the evidence that supports their faith, trans activists are no different, with their similar form of feelings-based science as well. 4. Trans means to help people feel safe. Trans widows. In theory, the transgender movement should demonstrate this fundamental in a positive manner, as its ideology supposedly encourages individuals to treat everyone empathetically and respectfully, achieved by supporting and embracing individuality so everyone can safely be free to be themselves while living the best, most comfortable lives possible. In practice, however, trans ideology prioritizes members and activists of its community more highly than the general public, not only when enforcing social norms and sex-based statistics, but also within personal relationships as well. This can be especially demonstrated when considering the abuse that autogynephiles inflict on their wives and families. Autogynephilia refers to men who get sexually aroused by the thought or image of themselves as a woman, which, if kept private and performed as either a form of kink or a consensual fantasy, is probably harmless. I say probably, because this type of man has been known to be perverse when trying on female clothing, exemplified by Bruce Caitlyn Jenner, who stole and wore his prepubescent 10-year-old daughter's clothing to satisfy his incestuous interest. Then, when caught by said daughter on camera, while Bruce pranced around in her female clothing, he talks about the perverse, traumatizing incident as a funny accident, done to gaslight his daughters into believing they hadn't just been violated. Regarding autogynephilia, it seems that whenever a cross-dressing husband gets regarded as brave and stunning, their wives are likely to end up in psychiatric care to cope with the psychologically abusive manipulation that's been inflicted upon them being trans widows, due to how frightened and overwhelmingly shocked these women typically become after discovering that their husbands were impersonating them while wearing their nightgowns, underwear, and other clothing. By waiting until their wife has children and becomes financially dependent, autogynephilic husbands break down their wives' sense of will by using them as muses designed to be stripped of individuality and stolen to be portrayed by the sociopathic men instead. And by definition, these men who use autogynephilia to become trans women are sociopaths. After ignoring social norms and overstepping social boundaries, these autogynephiles will reveal their true selves to their wife and disregard their deceitful false identity, while claiming that what the women see, feel, and know about their sexuality and understanding of gender is wrong. Then will use the coercive control tactics of gaslighting, violating, and harassing their wives into becoming financially and emotionally dependent, to leave them with a crippled sense of confidence and identity. These autogynephiles will act without considering the consequences that may inflict their wives by relocating their families internationally to isolate the women from their friends and families, all to prevent them from seeking help after feeling violated from discovering their lingerie stretched out and covered in dried semen after having lost them for a few weeks, for example. On top of being jealous and aggressive whenever their wives tried interacting with other adults, these autogynephiles would utilize non-violent emotional domestic violence tactics to form an invisible cage around their wives, done to constrain and control their wives' behaviour by insulting how they look for humiliation and contempt, removing their independence, and threatening them with blame if the husbands ever commit suicide due to the lack of subordination. These autogynephiles will hide this abuse by using their humour, intelligence, charisma, and mental illness to manipulate the public into ostracising their traumatised wives and celebrating the man's bravery for being a deceitful, manipulative crossdresser. Furthermore, trans women husbands may claim that their wives are being unempathetic and unreasonable for refusing to identify as lesbians while married to them, even though there are trans women like Chris Tyson, who likely aren't autogynephilic. Evidence shows that they're still husbands who've changed how they speak, feel, and act after having lied about their identity to their wives, which to those women may grieve their husbands' past selves as if the men they've married had passed away, hence calling them trans widows. For more information on this topic, I recommend watching the first documentary about the wives and children of trans-identified men called Behind the Looking Glass, created by Vaishnavi Sundar. Furthermore, this grief also affects the children of trans women fathers, as autogynephiles especially may reinforce their new identity by brainwashing their kids through intimidation and the eradication of their past selves. with some men even teaching their children to label them as the mothers who not only birthed them, but also have the capability and right to breastfeed and offer advice on womanhood and the female experience of puberty to their daughters. This delusion is even supported by Medicare statistics that allow patients to nominate their own gender, leading to an official reporting of 54 men giving birth to babies in 2014. All starting with Thomas Beattie, a transgender man with female reproductive organs, billed as the first pregnant man in 2007, who also paved the way for men to get C-sections and abortions officially as well. More unreliable and corrupt statistics aside, trans widows who have experienced organophilic men include Karen, whose husband of 20 years became a trans woman abruptly, without warning and with complete assurance by secretly researching it for years beforehand. This transition cost Karen aspects of her health, some friends, her marriage, their children's father, domestic stability, identity as a spouse, and confidence in her own judgment. Luckily, she found a wonderful counsellor who helped her recover from the trauma. Melissa, whose husband claimed that her loving him as a man suppressed his femininity, and that, per their counselor's advice, all the focus should be on supporting his journey into womanhood, and that the spouse's true feelings should be suppressed and disregarded. On top of hiding his true identity from their daughter, forcing her to call him mum and be treated as such, Melissa was trapped in an abusive marriage, to which revealing the truth to friends and family only increased the risk of becoming ostracized from everyone. Jessica, who, while drunk, her husband admitted before marriage that he was a cross-dresser, and she didn't mind as clothes were just clothes. After marriage, his personality changed upon wearing women's attire, to which they broke up after he transitioned the female. Then he devastated their son with the news of his transitioning without Jessica's knowledge, supporting her conclusion that any man professing to be female has the empathy and compassion of a stone, since while cross-dressing is fine, feeling a sense of womanhood upon doing so is an insult to all the women who experience the risks of childbirth and the many other hardships that come with being female. While the label trans widow may seem insulting to widows who'd had their husbands die before them, it doesn't change the fact that wives of trans women are victims of loss. So until a better label's created, perhaps critics should focus more on how to support these women, instead of comparing and shaming the struggles regarding their personal experiences of grief. Victims. Admittedly, the transgender movement has done its research regarding how to grow into an authoritarian power that influences police, journalists, and politicians into manipulating truth, justice, and identity by silencing skeptics. However, to gain true power over society, an ideology must make it socially acceptable to disrespect, manipulate, and disregard the rights of women, their own members, and the public. Exemplified by the transgender movement that physically, mentally, and socially abuses anyone who dares question it. All this can be demonstrated by their claims that non-compliance with their ideology must determine an undiagnosed mental illness and how they disrespect lesbians. Exemplified by James L. Day Middle School, who, rather than restoring sex-based privacy for change rooms to stop boys claiming to be women from using the 8th grade female change rooms, the TVUSD school board decided to implement an advanced policy. This being that girls could use the change rooms privately from boys, as long as they filed for either a religious belief or mental health accommodation. A policy supported by trans activists, which views wanting basic privacy as a form of abnormal anxiety, distress, and mental illness, and exists to prioritize protecting creepy boys over helping 14-year-old girls feel safe. Additionally, parents are being left in the dark about the gender ideology being pushed at schools, exemplified by Weaver Elementary School in Los Alamitos, CA, which, without warning to parents, placed two biological males as counsellors to spend 3 nights in the same cabin with the girls, justified by the men simply claiming to identify with she/her pronouns. Furthermore, freedom of literal identification risks endangering girls from boys using gender ideology as a means to harass and abuse, demonstrated by a boy who wore a skirt to enter a female-only bathroom, then physically and sexually assaulted a 15-year-old girl, during which the first school attempted to cover up the sexual assault by dismissing his gender identity confusion, claiming it was a mere fight, and hid evidence of him wearing a skirt. Worse off, the school forgot to protect the first victim, so she faced harassment from peers so severe that she was deprived of access to a safe educational environment, which meant she struggled academically, emotionally, and physically. Instead, the school concentrated on protecting the transgender individual and concealed the abuser's red flags so he could safely transfer to another school, where he soon abducted and sexually assaulted another girl. One could say that these are just the extreme examples of people misusing the ideology. But since anyone who speaks out about transgenderism in schools risks being labelled a domestic terrorist, people are likely to stay silent and let abuse be forgotten and covered up. Next up, trans activists are targeting, threatening, and manipulating lesbians who refuse to date trans women, and are actively sabotaging and shutting down female-only spaces. Demonstrated by Chloe, a woman who couldn't provide proper consent due to being intoxicated, felt pressured into having penetrative sex with a trans woman after repeatedly saying she wasn't interested. Worse off, she felt like the bad person in that scenario, and that telling anyone of the incident risked receiving repercussions from the LGBT community. Tragically, some lesbians support trans ideology, as shown from Amy, a lesbian who was labelled an extremist transphobe by her shocked and angry girlfriend who wanted to have a threesome with a trans woman that still had his male genitals intact. Furthermore, a survey showed that out of the 80 women who responded, the majority reported that they'd been pressured or coerced into accepting a trans woman as a sexual partner, exemplified by the trans women who expect lesbians to unlearn their genital confusion so they could have sex together, or that lesbians could lose their internalized trans misogyny if they dated trans women for long enough. Additionally, trans activists are always threatening non-compliant lesbian bars and women-only ventures with complaints and harassments for not letting trans women enter them. In response, women have been forced to create a secret lesbian bar spread by word of mouth to prevent trans women from entering and making them feel unsafe. Considering women have felt forced to make secret female-only spaces, it seems that there are no safe public-private spaces for women who want a break from receiving male attention. Lastly, the transgender movement even oppresses women who never even interact with transgender individuals, particularly when ladies start going through menopause. With menopause affecting approximately 2 million women in Australia currently, with another 80,000 joining annually, around 13%, or 260,000 of them, require menopausal hormone therapy to manage some of the more intrusive hormonal fluctuations, like hot flushes and night sweats. Due to the increasing demand for estrogen patches, and prescriptions rising to 500,000 a month, there has been a reoccurring global shortage since the year 2020, caused by unknown manufacturing issues, a brand ceasing production, and men using them instead. Considering approximately 9,450 to 56,700 trans women use this feminizing hormone therapy, even at the lowest estimate, these men are taking the remaining life-saving medication from females to affirm their delusions, indulge their fantasies, and cope with their deep-seated trauma and anxieties. While trans women may not be the biggest cause for the shortage in menopausal pads, they are taking what remains of them from women who would experience hot flashes, joint pain, fatigue, bone density loss, and itchy skin due to their lower levels of estrogen. Also, Ada Xiong wrote this as well, which suggests another conflict of interest when downplaying the usage of estrogen pads by trans women and the impact it's had on menopausal women. Furthermore, alternatives like gel and tablets may not be absorbed by some women and could carry risks for those with underlying health conditions. Additionally, it seems that trans activists don't seem to know what life-saving means, as they've convinced society to prioritise men's mental health, which can also be treated with therapy, over the physical health of menopausal women whose lives are literally at risk when they can't obtain estrogen patches. The disregard for women's health is exemplified by how hot flashes and night sweats can contribute to cardiovascular disease, the leading cause of death for women. Considering women are being forced to accept any man's desire to enter female private spaces and competitive sports, spread misinformation and manipulation, and strengthening restrictive gender-based stereotypes, it means that the true feelings of women, girls, and especially victims are being suppressed and silenced to benefit the men deciding and enforcing what it means to be female and feminine. Tragically enough, however, trans activists have even convinced some women that fighting for their own oppression is a fair form of truth and justice, which makes it seem, again, like a religion. Cult. YouTube is full of informative content creators who encourage the dispelling of lies, misconceptions, and more, which have helped ignite my desire for the truth, no matter how uncomfortable the reality may be. That being said, two atheist YouTubers who come to mind are Adam Conover and Genetically Modified Skeptic. Creator of Adam Ruins Everything, Adam Conover, created thought-provoking shows that encourage the questioning of everything, and currently makes videos on political topics. YouTuber Genetically Modified Skeptic makes evidence-based videos that aim to debunk religious ideology and support secularism by associating with the American Humanist Association. However, while they're skillful at uncovering truths and inspiring curiosity, they both strongly support and promote transgenderism, while also opposing and debunking religious movements, despite the cult-like similarities between the ideologies. Furthermore, here's a list of 15 similarities between transgender and religious ideology to support my claim that both concepts are more similar than expected. 1. Trans women use stereotypes and male presence to have more freedom than women, since males can safely go anywhere and females can't. Religious men use holy books and God's behalf to have more freedom than women, since males can safely go anywhere and females can't. 2. Trans women focus on the gender stereotypes that benefit males, even if that hinders the progress of women. Religious men focus on the ideology that benefits males, even if that hinders the progress of women. 3. Trans people feel like their gender and stereotypes are real, despite the lack of evidence. Religious people feel like their God and the afterlife are real, despite the lack of evidence. 4. Trans activists diagnose people who stray from societal norms with gender dysphoria, then suggest that those people return with consistent payments for life to realign their genders. Religious people diagnose those who stray from societal norms with demons, then suggest that those people return with consistent payments for life to remove the demons. 5. Most transgender and religious activists think that anyone who leaves the movements or turns bad wasn't truly a follower from the start. 6. By devoting their lives to the nation's popular religion or by becoming transgender, Prisoners have a higher chance of being freed earlier to spread awareness of their positive change. 7. Transgender and religious activists think that the popularity of a movement's ideology determines its validity. 8. Loves everyone, but when placed in leadership positions, transgender and religious activists use that power to benefit only their community. 9. Transgender and religious activists convince women that advocating for their own oppression by submitting to the authority of men is progressive, fair, and justified. 10. Most transgender and religious activists expect women to disregard their happiness, health, and safety to protect the feelings of men. 11. Transgender and religious activists downplay the amount of power and influence they have over society by referring to themselves as victimized minorities in constant need of support. 12. Transgender and religious followers don't care to research their ideology beyond cherry-picking the parts that affirm their beliefs and providing an undeserved benefit of doubt for leaders of the movement. 13. Transgender and religious followers condemn anyone who even believes in a slightly different version of their ideology and view them as more hateful than those who don't believe at all. 14. Transgender and religious activists believe that the figureheads of their movements are morally perfect and that any criticism towards them only stems from personal hatred. 15. Transgender and religious followers believe they're right, no matter how much evidence says otherwise. 16. Belief in religious and trans ideology comes not from evidence, but from necessity. For more similarities between the two, there's another list in my previous video, Why Transgender Ideology Endangers Identity and Children, and more to come in future ones. Hypocrisies aside, I do respect Adam Conover and Genetically Modified Skeptic as creators, and I highly recommend you check them out, since their trans views come from good places. Adam Conover has trans friends he wants to protect from American laws that negatively affect their lives, and generalizes that the trans community is mostly filled with similar people. However, by relying on personal relationships to shape his societal views, he minimizes the negative impact trans women have on women, and harms children by implying that young people should be able to sterilize themselves by taking puberty blockers. Genetically Modified Skeptic uses research to support his beliefs in transgender ideology, but uses fallacies to justify his conclusions about the movement's validity. One being that he begs the question by using research that already assumes transgenderism is objectively real, which means he only finds evidence that supports the conclusions he started with. Having watched many of their videos, I've found that Adam isn't afraid to admit when he's wrong, and Genetically Modified Skeptic is a calm and reasonable debater when opposing views challenge him. Therefore, I'm quite curious to see how they might challenge my points, and prove that my conclusions are false, as I'm comfortable with that. Like them, I'm simply seeking the truth, so any criticism is welcome and will be considered. For now though, I'm concluding that the transgender movement not only endangers women and their rights, but everyone, trans and non-trans alike. I'll be sharing more of my researched, honest views in future videos, so if you enjoyed this, I recommend subscribing to be notified for their releases. Till next time, I don't make the rules, I just call them out.